If I told you that King the Conqueror was the MCU's big bad, you would nod in agreement. More like a duh ninja type of way. However, I want you to think long and hard, maybe not long, about why you know that. Was it the MCU's storylines that told that to you? Or was it Hall H, me, and any other YouTuber on the internet telling you that he was on the way? I'll say it with you, it was the last part. Salutations and fist bumps, folks. Welcome back to the grid. And if you took the time to do that little exercise with me, you now notice that the MCU hasn't planted any seeds about Kang the Conqueror coming, except for the fact that they did use He Who Remains to foretell that he was on the way. But other than that, that was it. So I want to dive deeper on why it never really came up inside of the MCU until they started talking about him inside of Quantumania as he and him. To really understand this, we have to back up to the Infinity Saga. As the Infinity Saga began to roll out and the MCU started to gain strength, it did so pointing to a central theme with a looming threat, Thanos. Thanos was hinted at way before we actually saw any of his feats inside of Infinity War. Actually, his first on-screen appearance came as an end credit inside of 2012's Avengers. And when he's mentioned, or rather spoken to, in the beginning of the Avengers,
the universe, you and the humans, what can they do?
He's spoken of as a large threat that we just haven't come face to face with in the MCU yet. But at this point, just by the way that he's spoken of, we know that he's a big deal. Then Loki fights alongside the Chitauri against the Avengers and loses. And when we do see Thanos at the end of Avengers, he's as menacing as the beginning said he should be. Even though all we see is just his face, that's enough to understand that this guy is inevitable. That was a afterthought, by the way, specifically stated by Josh Sweetie. He actually knew that Thanos was going to be the big end game for the Infinity Saga, but the pieces weren't necessarily laid as it were, so he had to add those pieces so that Thanos actually made sense. And this is why we have that end credit, meaning we should have had something in terms of that for Kang. But I'm getting ahead of myself just a little bit. The build-up continues inside of the MCU for Thanos inside of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1, as we find out that he is the adoptive father of Gamora and Nebula. Further learning that Gamora was actually forcefully adopted because
when Thanos took my home world, he killed my parents in front of me. He tortured me.
And then when we get into Infinity War, we actually see him take her from her planet and destroy her family. We further build up Thanos inside of Age of Ultron. At the end credits, seeing him wielding a then empty Infinity Gauntlet, but we know that that's coming. And especially if you had recently read Infinity Gauntlet, you knew that that was about to be a really big deal and it was about to go down. So all the instances and relics leading up to Infinity War give us an understanding of who this Thanos guy actually is before we really meet him in his full-on feats and glory. And inside of the MCU's present day at that time, before we moved into the multiverse specifically speaking, relics for Thanos were peppered all over the MCU because he's mentioned multiple times inside of street hero stories and also mentioned multiple times in cosmic stories as well. And with all that in mind, you would think that it's a no-brainer for the MCU to set up its next big bad the exact same way, right? No. Nope, that ain't what happened at all. The very first mention of Kang happens inside of Loki Season 1, Episode 6, when He Who Remains mentions his variant. A ruler, a conqueror. And in that moment, it's not even direct. He Who Remains is a version of Kang, but it's not necessarily him in the one that we saw in Quantumania directly, because really, that's actually a version of Nathaniel Richards, a man that becomes Kang. And it's because of what's explained here that we even understand at all that He Who Remains is actually a version of Nathaniel Richards that won out in the multiversal war, then creating the sacred timeline and enforcing it with the TVA. He, meaning He Who Remains, then gives Sylvie an ultimatum: kill him and find out what these variants are, or keep things the way they are and take over the TVA. To which Sylvie chooses violence, kicking off or spurring the catalyst of the multiverse from there, which there's a little bit more to that story and we'll get into that in another video. Spurring the creation of multiple Nathaniel Richards across the multiverse again, but this time the one that becomes King the Conqueror actually wins. And everything that happens since Endgame is actually affected by this, which means that this is where we should have started to hear more about Kang as we got closer to Quantumania and seeing him in his full glory inside of what he does in the quantum realm. In my opinion, at the very least, we should have gotten a slight mention of his feats in terms of what he's done inside the multiverse, drawing it multiple times all over the place. Things like the Eternal, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, or even Shang-Chi, seeing as how the Ten Rings tech is very similar to Kang's army. But that did not happen. What we were presented with was a backstory solely based inside of Quantumania. It needed to have a lot more tailored to him, and it was not at all. And inside of Quantumania, in the quantum realm, when they actually say his name, falls flat, because we never got to build on any of the feats that he's done up until this point. We've only just thought about it or heard and had to figure out what he did in the background. And when I say figure out, I mean actually come up with that inside of our imaginations as the audience. That said, Jay Majors does do a wonderful job with the role, which is what he's supposed to do with what he's given, but the actual backstory was supposed to be done by the MCU as a whole. So up until now, all we know about Kang until we see him inside of Quantumania is that he's just one angry man, mad that he got banished from time. We don't understand why he's angry. We don't understand what he's looking for. There's no real gravity in terms of his full-on story to what and why he is the way he is. Put that in juxtaposition to Thanos actually killing a full planet, and we can actually see it happening on screen in Infinity War. Basically boils down to what could have been a very beautiful build-up moment for Kang showing up on screen inside the MCU for the very first time. When we see him walking up to Ant-Man inside of the prison that we see him in, that would have been a beautiful revealing moment of everything that Kang is and is supposed to be and going to be later on. If it would have been done correctly, it would have given us a lot of things to go off of and be terrified as we pan up to see him in his face. Then we have the opportunity to put both what we've seen before or heard before to the face of this villain. And if done right, that is literally So with all that to say, it felt like Kang was a bit afterthoughtish and a little undercooked in terms of his backstory that could have been added in retroactively if they had been paying more attention to that part of his story. And I get it, his performance for He Who Remains is the reason why the multiverse saga came about in the first place, but even with that, the build-up for him should have started a long time before Quantumania. What do you guys think? Leave that down in the comments. Should the MCU have started the process of injecting life for Kang or the backstory for Kang a long time ago? When should they have started it? After Endgame? Before Endgame? Let me know down in the comments, and until next time, y'all be smooth. Blurred out.